Three. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of 26.1 AI Podcast. Today we have our guest, Shreya Nallapati, who's the creator of an important social good AI project. And we'll turn over to Shreya to introduce it. Shreya, welcome.
Hi everyone. My name is Shreya Nallapati. I'm 19 years old and I live in Denver, Colorado. It's currently my last quarter of college, so I'm very excited about that. And what this organization is, it's called Never Again Tech. What it does, it's really focusing on the intersection of machine learning and AI and how it can help understand mass shootings. And so that was really the original concept of this organization. Can we use AI to predict mass shootings? So how our AI works, or how our like machine learning works, is that in 2019 we noticed a pattern, that three of the biggest mass shootings that would happen in the world all came and were like in their inception started on these what we call fringe communities dash alt right websites named 4chan, Nchan, and 8chan, which has actually been dismantled and now is 8kun. And what we realized is that the people who, frequent these forums where Brent and Tarrant and the other perpetrators posted, they all have the same kind of, they use the same kind of language. They actually espouse the same kind of ideologies that are very anti-Semitic, racist, and very, transphobic, all of what you can imagine. They kind of have the same ideologies, but within those, only very few of these kind of like posts that talk about them end up with an actual materialization of a plan. So what we wanted to do is we developed an automatic crawler that scans millions of posts within like a minute or so. And from this automatic crawler, we developed a simple, not really simple, but like an easy NLP processor that kind of first of all just analyzed all the posts to get a good idea. It's called count vectorizer, to get a good idea of what are the most common words, what are the most frequent words in a corpus or a body of text. From there we kind of went in and we're like, okay, we assigned a value with each of them. And so the value of ones in the vast of zeros, you can imagine, is very like small. There's not like a mass shooting happening for every post that is made. But when we did that, we found like 80%. We made it a 2080, I think. So we found 80%, or we took a very small subsection of these millions of posts. 80% were zeros, 20% were ones, right? And in these 20%, it's not necessarily a mass shooting, but what we clarified is like having a clear and tangible plan. And so within this clear and tangible plan kind of subsection, we took note of the exact kind of syntax that is used and what kind of distinguishes a zero from a one. And within that, that's when we, kind of align the AI or the automation process to whenever we scan a corpus or body of text, it automatically does the vectorizer and the count vectorizer. But we take our previous instances of ones and zeros and we align them to determine what future instances would look like. And that's a very small subsection of, trying to predict and prevent mass shootings. But what the key idea of this is understanding the kind of like bubbles or like the magma before a volcano erupts. What kind of language is being enabled? What kind of ideologies are being enabled? But past the classification, we wanted to see like, there are similarities between manifestos that are posted. Some are directly inspired from one to another. For example, the Christchurch shooting directly inspired the Ciabatta Poway shooting. And we can tell because the manifestos had aligned almost perfectly, or there were slight variations, but they talked about the same thing. And so at first we kind of came in with a supervised ML approach, 1010. But later, as we kept uncovering it, we really just wanted to understand this kind of really weird but also and very fringe, section of the internet, and how that can actually lead someone to commit a violent act. So what's the distinction between thinking about it versus doing it? And how can we determine that with words? So it's not by no means solved, but it does give us a clearer idea of, okay, so mass shootings and mass shooters, they don't just come out of nowhere. there's a community that enables this kind of thought process, that allows it and even encourages other people to do it. And that's when we kind of made our clear key realizations. Does that make sense?
What's your personal motivation for this? Why? What is you as a person, and what are you getting out of it?
Yeah, so really what I'm getting out of it is, sometimes I wonder that myself when I look through all these posts, and, mass shootings is a very, very hard topic, right? Well, I kind of had a personal experience related to the STEM mass shooting. So basically, a couple of my relatives, and so the STEM mass shooting actually happened right in my backyard because I'm like from South Denver, so Highlands Ranch. Um, what happened was, one day I was just like, kind of like driving, I think I was driving to work or something. Um, and I noticed a bunch of flurry of cop cars coming in. And I was like, oh shit, oh sorry, oh crap, am I speeding again? What's going on? But then I realized that all the cop cars were speeding towards the school that like my relatives went to. And I was like, oh my God, what's happening? And then someone told me there's a mass shooting happening right now. I was like, "Oh my God." So I texted them and I was like, "Hey, are you okay? What's going on?" And they were saying that, like we can hear the glass breaking, there's bullet holes in the wall. We see the blood coming out. Like that's what they were texting me as we were all filing out, like as they were all filing out single line, right? And so this really made me like upset because I remember feeling so hopeless when I was outside of the building, right? And I couldn't do anything about what's happening inside the school. But then seeing the despair of the parents who like didn't even know if their child was alive or not, that was very disheartening. And like consoling the crying parents, like the desperation of the wails, that's when I was like, oh frick, like this is really my call to action. This is why my work matters. Because although the STEM mass shooting perpetrators didn't necessarily have like definitely weren't on 4chan or 8chan as far as I know, and their social media trail is actually very small. There were definitely instances that showed that where they talked to their friends about it, and there were multiple warning signs. But we only care about mass shootings after they happen, not the like years or even months of like months of like build of it building up. So that's when I was like, tech is one thing, but really what the core of it is stopping these events from before they happen. And so that's kind of like where my personal motivation lies.
I think that's a very telling story behind what motivated you. How old were you at the time?
I think I was 18 or 17. No, I was 18. Yeah.
Okay, so it was really recent. And then just to get your like broader perspective, now you're using this machine learning that you must have learned not too long ago, and you're using it for the good, social good. But it also brings up to me a lot of privacy issues and questions like that. What is your feelings on AI in general? Do you have concerns about it being used for evil, or what is your? I mean, obviously you're using it for good, but what's your personal perspective on where society could take it too far?
hmm Well, I read this great book called The Singularity is Near. If you've heard of it, it's like a really the defining moment of AI and where it goes. And I don't remember if it's a quote from it or what I've like decided or like, but I think that AI is dependent on the people who use it. AI itself does not have power, or it isn't some automated robot that's like going around and running things that we have no control over. AI is dependent on the human databases and the humans that want to put it to use. So with that, there are good humans and there's bad humans. So in that same way, AI could have good uses or bad uses. I think that what we really try to do is the reason why this project is like has been like 2.5 years to 3 years in the making is because at first there was no data. And whenever you don't have good data, like if I'm only looking at a database of 346 instances, basically that means my machine learning is worthless because ML works on like, dozens and millions of data. Um, but so we spent that next year understanding where can we get those pockets of data. And that's why we came upon 8chan, which I think is a very good use. But in general, AI, I see really bad examples of AI, especially in Silicon Valley. I think one such company is like Palantir. using it, in inhumane ways without people's knowledge. But I think that what moral ethical code that we lie on is whenever that boundary between thinking and action in which it can hurt other human beings, that's when we kind of come in. And that's when we kind of made that judgment call. Okay, we need to use AI on this. It's not like, we're disclosing personal details because we can't. HN does not allow people to, like, I can't click on a user and get this name and everything. But if there's an actual tangible plan where it does endanger the lives of people around them and we have a possibility to stop it, that's where AI comes in with a good use. But AI in the instance of, of of, like, disclosing recipients to, an ice border, right? Or doing it unlawfully or unethically, that it's a very big distinction, and it's an important distinction. So that's why, it's so important to understand, to come up with good data and good databases in order for those machine learning things to be employed, because one ML technique is the same throughout, whether or not you use it for, like, climate change or, mass shootings. But what we really want to do is understand, is this the best way? And that's when, like, law enforcement officers come in too. And now with the changing landscape of law enforcement officers, we're really reconsidering, when do we make that a judgment call between, thought and action. So it's a very convoluted answer, but AI, again, I'll just, like, summarize it. AI itself is very naive. There's no, like, program or algorithm running without our knowledge. So it depends on the database and the people that run the AI and what use it's being used for.
Since you brought up Palantir and policing,
Mhm.
maybe take this chance to define your project against some uses of AI that superficially may resemble what you're trying to do. Particularly in the case of Palantir, it's very likely that they're vendors for law enforcement, for example, and they may be selling a solution for detecting or predicting criminality.
Yep, yep,
Right. So
yeah.
let's
And
set that straight for folks.
so, like, what the distinction is? Okay, so really, when we thought about, criminality, especially in the light of these past few months, we were kind of thrown aback by how egregious some of these use cases are and how biased the data is, especially against a certain demographic, in this case, African American males. So we had every option to kind of try and employ this machine learning, the analysis of syntax to determine if someone's like a mass shooter. In very extreme cases, can we use that and distill it somehow to determine criminality? But we decided against it because that in and of itself is a very, very biased field. More so, the actions that are taken against people who are identified as criminals in certain demographics are very extreme. There's no protocol. There's no established protocol like there is one if there's someone is about to commit a mass shooting. I can tell you those are very different. So instead, what we wanted to do is kind of employ something totally out of the AI and, like, tech to predict anything kind of field. So when we were looking at this, we realized that in all these protests and all of these, kind of civil engagements, there's been a lack of, like, concern about mental health and what mental health means. Not only mental health on one specific side, but there's like something devoid about a community. There's no community in, like, police officers versus Black Lives Matters. There's no community in, this polarity versus this polarity. So we hired a social worker, actually. Her name is Monty Angel. She's like a brilliant social worker in the field, to come to us and tell us, what's kind of, when we're analyzing, like, when we're analyzing social events and violence specifically, what's the key factor that's missing? And then we realized that, there's a very important topic that's being floated around right now called transformative justice and transformative justice models. And although it's not related to AI and tech in any way, transformative justice is like this great idea of, setting up pockets of peace within communities where they can kind of come through and kind of come and heal their trauma together, basically. So although at first I was like, whoa, this is a great recommendation, but what does this have to do with AI and tech? Well, it doesn't. What we did is we were creating a policy document on why transformative justice might be useful. So really, the Never Again Tech project isn't just applying AI to whatever field that there's like some data and maybe a use case. We really found one niche area where we definitely find it we think it's the most beneficial to use text to predict activity. But in the cases where there's already been examples of very egregious profiling and bias, we wanted to take a more radical route, and that's like writing policies to say, can we create transformative justice pockets in affected communities? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I'm following where you're going with that. It's an evolving conversation, so that's the tough thing. But most importantly, I did want to provide some contrast from what you're attempting to accomplish compared to vendors like Palantir and how they may be
Yeah.
interacting with law enforcement. Um, Decidedly, I can't imagine that there's many black males posting regularly on some of the websites that you are
Yeah,
monitoring for text and
absolutely.
communication. It's just not the ideology that fits with the demographic that's typically categorized as criminal by some of these vendors that are selling their solutions, probably in most cases irresponsibly to law enforcement.
Awesome.
So
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I just have to ask: is what I'm saying making sense right now? Because sometimes I know I can
Yeah, it is.
the
Yeah, I
whole
think it's making a lot of
but I
sense.
think it'll make
And what you're and let me just take a stab at seeing if I understand. But what you're doing is you're taking this very data science perspective of analyzing the data, and you're finding signals in some pockets and not in others, or you're questioning sometimes whether the signal is strong enough to make a judgment call off of some pockets or the others.
yeah. I mean, let me just say, like, I can definitely go back and revisit as many times as we need to really make sure that what I'm saying is being understood. Um, but really, like, predicting mass shootings or predicting anything with 100% certainty is just impossible. It won't ever be possible just because human behavior is so irrational. Human behavior is constantly changing, and the mediums from which we, like, kind of execute human behavior is always changing. So with when we came across this, like, giant, like, gargantuan, how can we predict mass shootings? Like, the answer is, if we was just like that, people would have solved it by now, because there's only 346 instances, or like maybe now 400. That's not enough for an AI algorithm to accurately say, well, X mass shooting is going to be tomorrow at this location at this time,
And it's
right?
also like a series of events, it sounds like, that leads up to that, a
Yeah,
series of conversations that,
exactly.
and that manifesto that you mentioned as well.
That
So,
manifests exactly.
well, I mean,
And
this is, I
so
think it's really helpful, and I think you covered it well. And I want to be sure that we touch on, this along with some other topics as well, if that's possible, because I want to get a full
yeah,
breadth of your, kind of where you're at with your vision of AI. And you already mentioned nicely about where it can go wrong. And I appreciate your answer about the good, good people versus bad people and using it as a tool. And I appreciate that very well. But what is your point where you say, I've reached the point where this is good enough, that is as good as it's going to be, or is that never going to happen with this project? Will you ever say, okay, now it is good, now I'm going to move on to my next project?
no, I think I'll always stay with the topic of, AI for social good, and also I'm really also intrigued by how we can prevent violence, because violence is such a big thing that happens, especially in the United States. I mean, I think the next steps are to employ more deep learning techniques, deep learning in terms of like BERT models on this corpus of data, and just let the AI run wild instead of giving it directions of like one and zero. So that would be one really big like next step for me. But in terms of like the project, I don't know. We'll see. I think that what we've made are really, really astounding discoveries. Not all of which I can disclose, but I think that we've shaped the AI, or the mass shooting conversation a little bit towards we're not. It's not the typical like lone wolf person perpetrator who's been bullied at school and wants to commit a mass shooting. That's the way the media portrays it, and it has an affinity to doing that. But it's about like I think that what our work has really done is showed that no, it's like what I said before, magma bubbling under a volcano. there's these pockets that people are starting to pay attention to a little bit. It's been covered sometimes, but people don't understand the intensity of these conversations that are happening on these fringe communities. And so that's one big revelation we made. And the AI definitely has some aspects to kind of work out, but that's why I said machine learning. I think next will really be, all of this is great, but what can civilians do in a place where there's a lot of like, not necessarily distrust, but like maybe distrust on law enforcement officials? Is there anything civilians can do about violence in general and preventing it as a community before certain instances have to materialize? And I think that's where that trauma and social work conversation comes in. So it's like the project right now is just like a very, it's literally just an amalgam of so many different pockets and like projects and ideas and conceptualizations. But I'm really happy about it, because if we did stick with one stringent goal of my ideas just predict a mass shooting 2 years out from now, that would have failed. But we're learning with the process, and we're understanding, we've discovered one big thing. What's the next big thing? It just happens
And you've
naturally.
developed quite a following on this too. It sounds like you have 200 people helping you or something like that. I think I read.
Yeah, at one point there was 200, but as soon as we made that more of a shift into kind of like the dark web and the kind of the things that you don't want to talk about, I think that has like the amount of people who want to work in that area has significantly been narrowed. But yes, at one point we had 200 people very eager about policy, data science, app development, website development. But as soon as we kind of narrowed it down, we found more people, but in different areas. Does that make sense? So, all
Yeah, absolutely. Is there a common thread between the people who want to help?
the common thread is people who have experienced or lived or grow up with mass shootings. Some way more personally affected than others, but it's also just like people who are really unrelenting. It's a very young demographic. It's like Gen Z, right? And the kind of like the kind of like thing associated with Gen Z, the people who want to get it done. That's definitely how I would describe it. When we at the beginning, the people who got it done were just as effective of the people who are as the people who are getting it done now.
Would it be help to
It's
have
just
inclusion of other generations into this process?
Oh, that's what exactly what I said. What I wanted to say. So we kind of started off as that, like 200 young like women, right? But as we went on, we started including policymakers and big politicians in our in our data and our board, and like in the project and the board, people who have dealt with like why has policy not been made in this area for so long. So definitely like now it's like it's starting to encompass people within the cities of like where racial violence occurs, to people who live in the suburbs. So it started off very niche, but now it's definitely getting into, well, this is something that affects everyone no matter what.
How close are you to using the data to identify root cause and using that data also to change policy?
Well, we've already started doing policy work. We used some of what we were saying for to write policies for Governor Hickenlooper and Bennett and Senator Bennett and some people on like the federal level as well. We discussed it with Gabby Giffords, the Giffords organization too. So we've already started implementing policy, but the truth is that real meat of the potato, the real meat of the sandwich, is like which is like translating what we learned in the dark web to the reality. That still has a long way to go, because we don't know who these people look like in real life. You don't know, like, in order to access those websites itself, you have to go through so many hoops. So it's still like varies removed from like policy itself, but we want to get it there. It's just not there yet.
Have you had a chance to connect with Emma Gonzalez about this and discuss
Yes,
it?
I've actually met her, and I've met Sarah Chadwick, who's one of the survivors at a global teen leaders organization.
Cool. How expensive is the compute time for running your project?
In terms of big O notation, is that
No,
what
no, not the
it?
complexity, but the actual cloud consumption or wherever you're running the training
Oh
model.
well, yeah. It's really the way it works is it's definitely expensive. I mean, you can talk about the time, although the algorithm runs very fastly. to download and store all of those data, that's it's very expensive. Especially because we have to get like an Amazon web server to like really make sure that if we lose it, because the website keeps changing every time, that there's some place to store it. So it is expensive. The way we wrote the like crawling web application is, it can process it in multiple, like it processes it multiple in like in a matter of seconds, but storing it is really where the expensiveness comes
Ha-
in. It's having to place to store it.
can Brian or I help in trying to find you some resources, or do you already have sponsorship on it?
For like storing the data. Uh,
Yes.
oh yes, I would love that. I mean, we tried Splunk out a little bit, but we want to see if like, because like we're talking millions and millions, and so yeah, we'd love to see if there's any other help in that area.
Had you spoken to any of the cloud providers at all and their products, or perhaps like Red Hat or any of the storage
Yeah,
providers?
we want to. Right now, yeah, right now we're like, because like right now it's also very, very highly sensitive data too. So we want to really make sure that there's all these security considerations, not only because what happens if it's leaked, but because the nature of the material itself is just so inexplicable. um we were like looking at different vendors, so it's a good conversation to have, and if you have any resources, but for now we were like looking in a very limited sense.
If you have any kind of a concise proposal, I'm happy to try to forward it to the contacts I may have.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, we I can definitely give that to you.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Send it both of our ways. We'll do our best to help. We run this podcast for just our own personal interest in this space, and we're not commercially aligned, but certainly we can do social good as well. Even though we're not generation, what generation are we? X, Don, I think.
You and I are solidly X.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
So
okay.
we're a couple
Gen,
characters. We're a couple characters away, but with the same mission in mind. I think
I think
that I think
Gen Z likes our music though. So
is that
Yeah.
true? Okay, so yeah, what kind of music do you like? Yeah.
Me? Oh, I kind of like K-pop a little bit.
Oh,
I know it's
oh
weird,
no, that's
but
not weird at
yeah.
all. That's very popular these days. That's interesting.
yeah, BTS is a multi-billion-dollar enterprise now with their IPO.
Yes, yeah, no, the amount of like, I mean, I don't necessarily like, I'm not a fan of them specifically, but the K-pop industry is doing wonders for the South Korean government. Oh my god.
I speak Korean. My mom's Korean, so I get it.
Oh wow. Yeah, that I was gonna say I really like the group EXO. I don't know if you've heard of
Yeah,
them, but yeah.
I'd have to look them up.
yeah, I'm
I
familiar.
think I
Mhm.
like G Dragon and
Oh, Big Bang. Yeah, that's I love them too.
yeah.
Yeah.
How do people who want to connect with you? How do they get in touch with you? How do they?
Well, I mean, yeah, definitely just visit the website
Never
neveragaintech.org.
again, tech. Okay. And
And we have like a fill out your information kind of like form.